David Lipton, welcome.
It's great to be here.
During these meetings, we heard that the global economy was mediocre and uneven. Is this all gloom here?
First, the global economy was in crisis 3 years ago. It's now not in crisis. That's good news. We have seen a slowdown from what we expected this year, but we're projecting a recovery to 3.8% growth next year. That's good news. And for perspective, if you look at the 25 years before the global financial crisis, the average growth in the global economy was 3.8%. So we're projecting that growth will be more or less at the global average. Now, why do we worry that there's a new mediocre setting in? And that's because we think that the world could do better, and we're worried that the world might actually do worse. And so we're calling for efforts, strong efforts, to make sure that we invigorate global growth and take steps to prevent some of the downside risks that we are concerned about. So I wouldn't say that we're gloomy. I would say that we're cautious at a time now where the global economy is recovering to try to solidify the gains that are possible.
So the good news is we're not on the brink of a crisis. The bad news is that because we're not on the brink of a crisis, how do you mobilize policymakers on difficult reforms?
It's interesting to note that most of the dramatic reforms in terms of structural reform in Europe have happened in countries that had IMF programs. So it's surely true what you're suggesting, that when countries are in crisis, they're more likely to mobilize the political support to do something. I would say there are two words: advice and emulation. The fund has to give the best advice it can, and I think we've done that during these meetings. We've said that to support growth, there should be efforts to boost demand, take structural measures to boost supply, and where necessary, rebalance economies that need that. And I think that's good advice, and I think a lot of people listen to our advice here. But secondly, emulation. We heard in the meetings that went on here, countries that have made changes speak about what they've done and what they're getting for it. For example, everyone's focused on the structural reforms that Spain has undertaken and the fact that they now, after a very difficult period, have started growing again. They have a long way to go. They've not recovered the growth declines they've had, but they are recovering. And it appears that the structural reforms are taking hold and having an effect. The Mexicans told a lot about the structural reforms that they're putting in place. Some, like the energy reform, things that Mexico has been trying to do for literally generations. And I think when ministers and governors hear the efforts that others are taking and the successes they're having, they're going to be able to emulate that and be wanting to emulate that. And I think that's an important, that'll be an important part of trying to get countries to act despite not being in crisis.
So in a way, you think there was greater appreciation by policymakers that structural reforms are the key to lift growth?
Well, there really are different camps. Some people, some countries are focused on the need for demand and are pointing to the fact, that's right, that there are countries with very substantial economic slack and high unemployment rates, very high youth unemployment rates. There are others that point more towards the need for structural reforms, and those are very important too. The truth is, virtually every country would benefit from structural reforms.
Yeah, the need for infrastructure investment was a common theme throughout the meetings, especially at the program of seminars as well.
Well, first, what's most attractive about infrastructure in the setting that I've just been talking about is that it affects supply and demand. When you build infrastructure, it's new capital that creates benefits for the economy, both households who drive on the highways and firms that use the transport infrastructure. So it raises supply potential and raises supply. But of course, while you're constructing the infrastructure, it raises demand. And so I think it's very attractive because whether you're for supply or demand, you should be for infrastructure. Now, of course, infrastructure isn't for everybody. Some people have better infrastructure, some have weaker or more dilapidated infrastructure. And of course, the implications of embarking on an infrastructure program differ from place to place.
Finally, what would you say is the one key takeaway from this year's annual meetings?
Well, our message going in is our message going out, which is that there's urgency to providing new momentum even though we're recovering, the recovery could be made stronger, and that every effort to strengthen growth lessens the vulnerabilities that we have to the legacies of the crisis and the downside risks.
Well, on that note, thank you, David Lipton.
Thank you.